Okay. See if anybody joins me. Not, that's all right. I'm going to be reading from a book by Leroy Froome. This is the historical development of the innate immortality concept from 900 BC to the time of Christ, the rise of the Platonic postulate, and penetration into the Jewry. Let's see. There's supposed to be a picture with that. Shoot. Greek philosophy reaches summit of pagan thinking. Let's see. Centuries before the dawn of the Christian era, the Greeks developed a civilization surpassing all previous cultures. Their language was perfected into the most adequate vehicle ever devised for conveying human thought. Their religion, however, was a polytheistic personification of the powers of nature, based on a semi-pantheistic concept of the world. Their many gods embodied the baser as well as the nobler passions of the human soul. And there was little concept of God as a personality or of sin as an offense against a holy God and involving guilt. From about 600 BC onward, philosophy occupied an increasingly dominant place in Greek life and began to undermine credence in the crude polytheism of the past. Such thinkers as Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Zeno well nigh exhausted the realm of uninspired speculative reasoning. The philosophy of the 4th century was dominated by Socrates. Nevertheless, he was executed by the Athenians for his atheism, quote unquote. His greatest pupil was Plato, founded the older academy, and Aristotle, after him, the pupil of Plato and teacher of Alexander the Great, founded the peripatetic school, walking around, or Lyceum in the grove of Lycus, or Lyceum. These men personified the summit of pagan philosophy. Under them, speculative thought provided the loftiest pagan philosophy of immortality to appear in all past time. Imprinted immortal soulism on world thought. That the Greeks left their impact upon the world of thought as pertains to the nature, origin, and destiny of man as no other people of the past have ever done is beyond controversy. Both their ideas and their terminology have been heavily drafted upon by the makers of early North African Christian theology, and prior to that, by Philo of the Jews, likewise of Alexandria. It should be borne in mind that when Christ came, Hellenic thought ruled the world, and that world was a Roman world. Its influence has persisted through the succeeding centuries, such the larger background, which, of course, Rome takes over after Greek, and then Greek is the lingua franca of the 1st century world. That's why they had the Septuagint, and the New Testament was written in Greek. The doctrine of the innate immortality of soul, both in thought and in phrase, in teaching and in terminology, is thus derived directly from Greek philosophy. Never should it be forgotten that it was in Greece that the highest pagan development of the immortal soulism concept took place. While the thought, but not the phrase, was found among the Egyptians, both the Platonic Greek teaching and the terminology reappeared in Judaism, before as well as after the appearance of Christ, and even more conspicuously among Christians from the 2nd century onward. The concept of innate, indefeasible immortality was the product of the poetry, mythology, and philosophy of Greece. However, rather than of its religion. It came through its bards and sages, not its priests and prophets. So while such speculative thought projected the theory of immortal soulism, it never became general or popular, the masses holding to the old mythologies. They feared a fatal dissolution, either upon death or later. The philosophic presentation was too complex and too speculative for popular understanding or acceptance. The prevailing attitude was devoid of personal hope. The early Hellenic teaching was dim, fragmentary, uncertain, inconsistent. It affirmed a joyless afterworld wrapped in gloom, a dark shadow of this world where men continued to exist as wretched shades of their former selves. The issue was, is death a state of utter unconsciousness or annihilation or a migration to a better world? The ancient Greeks did not think of body and soul as did the Egyptians, with continuance of the latter as dependent upon the former. The separate existence of the soul was the most primitive Greek concept. Vague in the time of Homer, 9th century BC, this conception was intensified under Aeschylus the Pindar, 5th century. Aeschylus and Pindar, 5th century BC. The later doctrine of the transmigration of souls, widely held by other peoples, had no part in the concepts of the early Greeks under Homer and Hesiod. The primitive concept of the soul or ghost defined it as sort of fine matter like smoke, which according to Homer separates itself from the body at death. The notions of immortality were vague, as were those of future rewards and punishments. A murky abyss with gates of iron and floors of brass, as one phrased it. Their search for immortal life after death was pathetic. 5 stages in philosophical development. Philosophy in Greece passed through several periods or stages. 1, the scientific period, with Heraclitus and Pythagoras in 510 BC. 2, the period of enlightenment with transition to the study of man under the Sophists in the 5th century and Socrates. 3, the systematic philosophers with Plato and the Academy, with Aristotle and his Peripatetics. 4, the later ethical period with Zeno of Citium, 263 BC, and the Stoics, Epicurus, 270 BC, and the Epicureans. Pyrrho, 3rd century, and the Skeptics, and the Eclectics with Philo, AD 47. And 5, finally, Neoplatonism, beginning under Philo, but developed largely under Plotinus, AD 205 to 270, and climaxing in the Alexandrian philosophical school of the Church Fathers. We will trace these progressively or chronologically. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I'm going to skip that. I could show you this thing here, but he just shows the development of that just chronologically here in a chart. But scholars of note with no position to sustain and no cause to advocate, and not holding personally to conditionalism, have thoroughly compassed the teachings of Greek philosophy and have come independently to similar conclusions, agreeing that the origin, nature, and destiny of man was one of Greek philosophy's primary concerns. This teaching was interwoven as a distinctive thread all through the pattern of their thought. And these scholars have left their lifelong studies and analysis on record with characteristic thoroughness. Such men as Rode, Zeller, Ritter, Preller, Fairbairn, Draper, Charles, Grube, and others have written whole books, sets of books, or chapters dealing with this aspect of Greek thought. Heidelberg University, Dr. Erwin Rhodes' exhaustive study, Psyche, the Cult of Souls and Belief in Immortality Among the Greeks, ran through 8 German editions. It is priceless as a reference. Berlin University, Dr. Edward Zeller's 2-volume A History of Greek Philosophy had 4 German editions, and his Outlines of the History of Greek Philosophy had 13 German editions and at least 7 American printings. Several chapters in Dr. Andrew Fairbairn's studies in the philosophy of religion and history, including 2 on the belief in immortality, and Oxford's great scholar R.H. Charles, and his books are both highly valuable. Mention should also be made of sections in Alger, Salmon, Hudson. Such is the cumulative expert evidence available. For example, according to the penetrating analysis of John W. Draper, let's see if I can get that. In History of the Intellectual Development of Europe, Greek philosophy is tersely summarized as revolving around 4 problems: origins, the nature of the soul, existence of God, and criterion of truth. Such an analysis indicates the necessity of a preliminary survey of the various schools of philosophy leading up to Plato, who established the synthesized pattern that so profoundly influenced the Christian church from the 2nd and 3rd centuries onward. These scholars' treatises of the past form the basis of this chapter. The positions here surveyed are therefore amply documented and cross-checked. Let's see. I don't like the way this is giving me this. Okay, so Homer, the persistence of life beyond death in Homer. This is like 800, 900 BC. About the earliest expression of belief in the persistence of life beyond death appears in Homer and the Homeric poems, circa 850 BC. Apart from the question of their precise origin and authorship, and whether they sprang from earlier bards, these poems are a witness to the belief of the time. Though they contain conflicting statements, death was not believed to be the end of man. Something was believed to survive. Death was not extinction, but continuance of existence. As noted, the soul is conceived to be airy and breath-like, a kind of misty double of the physical body, and superior thereto. It is all very hazy and ethereal. Homer held that life after death was a shadowy counterpart of full-blooded bodily life on earth, a form without substance, from the Iliad and the Odyssey, the souls fleeing to the house of Hades, the gathering place for the departed. They cannot speak until a draught of living blood has restored life to them. There was nothing spiritual about Homer's souls. Salmon records that the Greek afterworld, they call it, was a joyless land wrapped in murky gloom, the dark shadow and spent copy of the world in which men continue to exist as the wretched images of their former selves. In Homer, only one part of man's composite nature survives death. It was sort of soul substance, something possessing faculties that characterize conscious life. The soul, he taught, enjoys an independent and secret existence in the body, and upon the death of the body, independently withdraws itself. It exercises no function of the human spirit, thought, will, emotion, which belong to the mind, and all functions of the body disappear with its dissolution into the original elements. Upon the death of the body and entrance into Hades, the soul loses consciousness and thought. This is from the Iliad, I guess. It knows nothing of the upper world and cannot return thither, and its personality does not persist. Parts of the Odyssey do suggest an occasional return of consciousness, but if immortality were vouchsafed to any individual, it must be given when living, through translation to the Elysian fields. And as noted, it was the poets who were the earliest heralds of a possible immortality for man. The masses were unmoved by this sentiment and lived and died under the terrors of a cruel fatalism. However, according to Hesiod in the 8th century, survivals of animism appear. In Works and Days, AD 109 through 201, death came to men of the golden race like a sleep, making them like gods and partakers in immortality. After death, they became watchers over mankind and exercised large powers. Men of the silver race had their abode under the earth, but were blessed in the underworld. Those of the bronze race became phantoms in Hades. Such were the mythical concepts of conscious and independent activity of souls after death that helped to form the early Greek doctrine of immortality.